There are currently two superpowers going head-to-head over these tiny Japanese islands. Neither country actually lives there. So why do they care so much? First things first, let's introduce our two teams. In the red corner, we have China. In the blue corner, we have Japan. Both China and Japan are major global players with significant economic and political clout. They're both permanent members of the UN Security Council, and they're both nuclear powers. They're also close trading partners with bilateral trade exceeding $300 billion annually. In the center of the ring is this guy. He may look small, but he's actually pretty important. That's because while he might not be particularly large, both China and Japan believe that he's rightfully theirs. Let me explain. These islands are located in the East China Sea, roughly halfway between mainland China and Japan. They include 3 larger islands and several smaller ones, all of which are currently controlled by Japan. Altogether, the islands cover an area of about 6.5 square kilometers, which is roughly equivalent to 2.5 American football fields. Legally speaking, the Senkaku Islands, as they're known in Japanese, have been incorporated into Japan's Okinawa Prefecture since the end of the 1895 Sino-Japanese War. In fact, the islands were officially designated as Japanese territory in 1906. That makes it pretty clear that Japan believes they own the islands outright. But what does China have to say about all this? Well, the Chinese government claims that the islands are, quote, an inalienable part of China's territory, despite never having controlled them. This claim was reiterated as recently as September of last year when Foreign Ministry spokesman Zhao Lijian stated, "The Chinese government has never recognized the so-called national title of the Japanese government over the islands." Given the importance placed on these islands by both countries, it's no surprise that the dispute over them has the potential to spiral out of control. After all, international border disputes are already considered one of the most likely flashpoints for future conflicts between great powers, and China and Japan are already on edge as it is. Tensions between the two countries have been high in recent years due to a number of factors, including China's growing assertiveness in the region, territorial disputes in the South China Sea, and the status of Taiwan. So why exactly are these two superpowers fighting over some tiny, remote islands? And how did this territorial dispute become such a big deal? As with many international conflicts, the answer is complicated, but I'll try to break it down as simply as possible. To understand this dispute, it helps to know a little bit about the history of the islands themselves. The Senkaku Islands, or the Diaoyu Islands as they're called in China, have been inhabited for thousands of years. However, they remained relatively obscure until the mid-19th century when they became the site of a number of increasingly aggressive fishing expeditions. When the Chinese began venturing too far into Japanese waters, the Japanese government decided to take action. In 1885, Japan established a new administrative district encompassing the Senkaku Islands. A decade later, in 1895, Japan went to war with China. The resulting treaty forced China to recognize the Senkaku Islands as Japanese territory, effectively incorporating them into Japan's Okinawa Prefecture. For the next few decades, the islands remained largely out of the public eye. That all changed, however, when in 1944 the United States invaded and subsequently occupied Okinawa. At the time, China was in the midst of World War II and would soon emerge as one of the victors of the conflict. You would think then that China might have raised an objection to the U.S. occupation of the Senkaku Islands, especially considering that they now claimed sovereignty over them. But they didn't. Instead, China effectively did nothing. This inaction essentially gave the U.S. the green light to do whatever they wanted with the islands, which is exactly what they did. Shortly after reuniting with Japan at the end of World War II, the U.S. transferred the Senkaku Islands back to Japanese control. Once again, China said nothing. They didn't issue any sort of formal protest or ultimatum. They just watched as the islands were officially returned to Japanese administration without even attempting to stop it. Fast forward a few decades, and suddenly China's made the Senkaku Islands a central tenet of its foreign policy. So, what happened? Why did China suddenly start taking an interest in these tiny, unimportant islands? Well, like I mentioned before, the answer is complicated, and there's no single event or factor that can be pointed to as the cause of China's territorial ambitions. Instead, it was likely a combination of different circumstances, each of which played a role in gradually shifting China's perception of the islands. For example, we can point to the rise of Chinese nationalism as one contributing factor. Since the early 1980s, China has experienced a dramatic increase in national pride. This has been fueled by a number of factors, including rapid economic growth, increased military capabilities, and a sense of being on the verge of global prominence. In this climate, it's not surprising that the Chinese government would seek to bolster its territorial claims in order to demonstrate strength and unity among the populace. Another factor that must be taken into account is the ambiguous relationship between China and Taiwan. The two sides split in 1949 following a protracted civil war, and ever since they've maintained separate political systems and governments. For a long time, the U.S. supported Taiwan and provided it with weapons and financial aid. This support was seen as tacit endorsement of Taiwan's claim to rule all of China, including the Senkaku Islands. As a result, China saw any association between Taiwan and the islands as a provocation. However, the situation became more complicated in 1971 when the United Nations General Assembly voted to expel Taiwan and replace it with the People's Republic of China. This effectively gave China the green light to pursue its territorial claims more aggressively. Without UEC support, Taiwan no longer had the leverage it once did, and China felt emboldened to take action. But it wasn't until 1996 that China formally declared its intention to reclaim the islands. That year, the Chinese government passed a law that explicitly included the Senkaku Islands as part of Chinese territory. This move was widely seen as a response to a number of events that had occurred in the previous decade, including the 1989 Tiananmen Square protests, the collapse of the Soviet Union, and the end of the Cold War. By asserting its territorial claims more forcefully, China was able to rally public support and distract attention away from internal problems. As you can see, the dispute over the Senkaku Islands is the product of a number of historical, political, and social factors. It's not simply a case of two countries fighting over some empty rocks in the middle of the ocean. Instead, it's a highly charged issue that has the potential to escalate into a major conflict between two nuclear powers. Today, the Senkaku Islands are still a source of tension between China and Japan. The Chinese government continues to claim sovereignty over the islands and regularly sends ships and aircraft into the surrounding waters. While the Japanese government maintains control over the islands, it's unclear how long this will continue. As China grows more powerful, it's likely to become more assertive in pursuing its territorial claims. And if tensions continue to rise, there's a real risk that this could lead to a major confrontation. This is a developing story, and we'll continue to monitor the situation closely. We'll keep you updated on any new developments and provide analysis from our team of experts. If you want to learn more about the conflict between China and Japan, we've also produced a number of videos on the topic. Thank you for watching this video. We hope that you enjoyed it and learned something new. If you did, please be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more content.